right, welcome. So this video is dopamine balance, what it's like, right? So what it's actually like to live in a state of dopamine balance or truly just being in homeostasis, right? But not a lot of us really know or are familiar with this feeling of homeostasis anymore. So I thought I'd make a little video explaining what exactly it feels like to be in the state of dopamine balance and hopefully motivate you to take some of my dopamine detox content a little more seriously, actually apply some of the principles, because once you can push through the pain, push through the discomfort, and reach this state of homeostasis again, it is absolutely worth it, right? You just, it's like the saying, the grass is greener on the other side, but I'm telling you to jump the fence when you can't even see the grass, right? So this is essentially me revealing what is truly on the other side and what you can actually experience on the other side of overstimulation and the dopamine deficit. So to intro this, I'm just going to explain my experience with dopamine detoxing and dopamine addiction, right? For a period of time, I was very addicted to social media, TikTok, Instagram. Actually, I say Instagram. I didn't really personally use Instagram very much, but the typical like scroll through TikTok, then go over to a different app, go to a different app, go to a different app, right? I had Instagram, I had TikTok, I had Snapchat. I was also addicted to weed for a period of time, right? Always addicted to sugary food. Sugary food is still one that I struggle with and that I'm working on. But recently my diet has been a lot better, I will say, and the differences are incredible. Little side note, this video is about dopamine, but if you can cut out sugar and you can replace it with fruit, for example, or if you can replace it with a simple carb that's easy to break down and process, just the one benefit to focus on, you'll feel so much more energy throughout the day and you'll be able to keep consistent with a lot more work. And if you're an athlete, a lot more training. If you're eating fruit throughout the day instead of snacking on sugars, fake sugars, like any type of complex carbohydrate and any type of processed sugars, right? When you're craving those things, you're really craving energy, and simple sugars from fruit are going to be the easiest to convert into usable energy, and it'll happen on the fastest time scale. So if you eat a fruit, it's faster. It's a shorter period of time before you'll feel a boost of energy than if you were to eat a piece of bread, right? Because a piece of bread would be considered a complex carbohydrate. It takes longer for the body to break down. Simple carbs are easy to break down and can be instantly converted into usable energy. So, little side note, right? But in the past, I've been addicted to stimulating food, right? Food that is stimulating to my brain, that releases a lot of dopamine. And this is a form of dopamine addiction, right? Yes, you can become addicted to the flavors, but specifically your brain becomes addicted to the rush of dopamine because it associates that with the highest density of nutrients and calories for a specific food group, right? So if you're eating food that invokes a lot of dopamine release and that is very pleasurable to the brain, it's typically because the brain thinks that is a nutrient-dense food, right? So I've had these addictions in the past, right? And there was a period of time where I got so deep into a lot of them all at once that basically nothing felt pleasurable, nothing felt enjoyable, nothing was interesting to me. Although there were interests that I had, things I wanted to pursue, I couldn't seem to actually take action on them because I couldn't bring myself to care enough in the moment to work on them. But I always found myself wanting to and being motivated to make these changes. It's just that in the moment, there was never enough motivation or drive behind those actions to make those changes permanent. And that's due to a slight dopamine deficit, right? Because my brain is used to stimulation from social media, for example, right? Quick hits of dopamine and information, followed by the moment I get bored, scroll, and then the next quick hit of information and therefore dopamine, right? So when your brain is used to this cycle, it becomes very difficult to then go and engage in real work, right? It becomes difficult to then go and engage in training or exercise, right? It becomes more difficult to then go and read a book. because your brain is wired to get these instant hits of dopamine, whereas these activities, they take longer to release the same amount of dopamine. You have to put in effort first, whereas the addictions, you don't have to put in effort first. And so the brain becomes wired to, with little and minimal effort, receive big, large rewards, right? Huge spikes of dopamine as a reward for little effort and little work, whereas the opposite is true in reality, right? It takes a lot of work to get a little bit of satisfaction, a little bit of dopamine. So when I was in this hole, it felt like I would not be able to get any work done, right? It was dreadful to train, for example. It was dreadful to work out. It was, it felt like a drag to think about eating a salad or to put in the effort to make a meal instead of just grabbing something that was already made from the kitchen, right? These small things are just realities of what living in a dopamine deficit are, right? So the motivation to cook comes from a desire for good food and a good meal. But if I can get that same hit of dopamine from minimal to no effort by grabbing, if there's cakes in the fridge, or not in the fridge rather, but the pantry, there's cakes, there's cookies, there's crackers, there's chips, whatever. If you can grab these things from the pantry, or you can grab things out of the fridge that are already prepared, and get that same hit of dopamine, your brain is going to learn to not put in the effort for the good food, right? Your brain is going to learn that it doesn't need to put in as much effort for as much reward, right? And so the way we get out of this is we have to remove the things that are overstimulating us. We have to remove the things that are spiking dopamine to this level. And the problem is that you've done it for so long, right? You've done it consistently for so long that your brain is now wired to associate pleasure and gratification from these instant rewards that we get from easy dopamine, right? So the alternative would be we remove these activities and we get used to putting in effort again, right? And find our enjoyment in effort itself again. And that's exactly what I did, right? I basically forced myself through the addiction by putting myself into motion, right? Putting in effort in the places that I knew I wanted to see growth in, right? Putting effort into my sport, putting effort into my training, right? Going to the gym more consistently, eating a healthier diet, right? Starting and growing my business, reading books and learning more. I basically had to force effort into a couple of these things right off the bat in order to break the cycle. And then I had to continue to put in effort in order to regulate my brain to these activities now being the stimulating things to do throughout the day, the stimulating parts of my day, right? For example, this is the most stimulating part of my whole day. And, maybe not the most stimulating, but this is to a similar degree as the other two things in my day that I would consider to be the most stimulating, right? So there's recording content and making content. I'm not doing any more work on content today. I have a full 13 hours of scripting I'll have tomorrow because we're going on a road trip and I'm going to be in a car for 13 hours. So I'm going to just script videos. So I'm not working on scripting today, I'm working on recording. So recording content is one of those things. Then the next thing would be training, right? I'm a snowboarder, so I train my tricks on the off season on a trampoline with a trampoline equipped board, not a real one because the metal edges, it's just foam bottom. Can be used on a trampoline. So I practice my tricks when I'm not on season, and then during the season, I can go and put those tricks down on snow, right? So training is one of those things. And considering that's my sport, that's the thing that I love, that's probably the most stimulating, but they're all around the same degree, right? They take the same amount of effort and so therefore give the same level of stimulation. And then the gym is the third thing, and the gym is probably the most stimulating for me just because of the way I have my workouts set up. It kind of feels like a game almost. And the way I create my protocols and for right now my fitness tracker, right? The way I track everything and the way I keep everything, it kind of just feels like a game, right? It feels very fun and interesting. And so that keeps stimulation up. But the reason these three things are the most stimulating is because they take the most effort, right? And when they're completed and I've achieved them, I'm the most satisfied with the results, right? So because I've wired myself this way to associate my dopamine from long-term rewards, now these things become the most stimulating, right? To a degree, any type of, let's say I scroll or whatever, let's say I go on like YouTube to watch an educational video and I end up on shorts somehow, right? I would associate that as a painful activity because I'm not looking at the micro moment of watching the content. I'm looking at the macro of the entire event, right? So from the beginning of this event to the end of this event, how do I feel? Did I start, let's say it's scrolling, did I start scrolling feeling like shit and end feeling better? Or did I start scrolling feeling pretty good and then end it feeling like shit? Or was there no change, right? Was there no change over this, 30-minute span? Observe this and see which activities cause you to alter your state in a positive way and which activities cause you to alter your state in a negative way, right? If you look at something like recording content, for example, I started this morning off feeling like I have too much to do today and too little time, and not necessarily stressed out, but just a little bit overwhelmed by this idea, right? There's so much to do and I have to just focus on one task at a time. I have to just sit here and talk to a camera until I'm done, and then I can go and move on to whatever else, right? But if you look at the time horizon of the 2 hours I'm here recording, I may have started feeling a little bit overwhelmed or, stressed out or whatever. But at the end of this block, right, at the end of recording my content, how am I going to feel? Well, I'm actually going to feel a lot less overwhelmed and a lot less stressed, even though I used some of my time for the day, because I just completed one of the biggest tasks, right? So now one of the biggest things that requires my mental energy is now complete. And so therefore, all right, now I can just manage the rest of the day's tasks, and it's a lot easier once the hardest thing is out of the way, right? So if you observe how things change from point A to point B, instead of observing how you feel in each micro moment, you can see very clearly which activities are positive and which ones are negative, right? And so you just remove the activities that are causing you to alter your state in a negative way, or that are causing you to basically overstimulate dopamine, which then leaves you in a lower state of dopamine, right? Simple as that. You observe these things and you remove the things that are causing negative change and add more of the things that are causing positive change, right? And so for me, I removed TikTok, I removed, all of my social medias. I don't use social media at all anymore, except for making my own content, right? So with that, what was I left with? Well, now I was left with either I can go and fall down other bad paths, right? I can go and start drinking or being a degenerate in other ways, or I can go and start engaging in the work that I've been putting off, right? I can go and start training more and going to the gym more consistently, and then I can start creating a YouTube channel and making content for that channel, right? And start to see the growth there. And then as you pursue these things, you start to regulate your brain to normal amounts of dopamine again, right? And when you have done this, now it becomes easy to engage in difficult activities. It becomes easy to engage in work. So I know we're like 14 minutes into the video, but we're still kind of getting into the actual content here. But before we start this video, I just want to let you guys know I am running a new coaching program. So I have a program where I am going to basically take your guys' goals and I'm going to transform that, and I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm going to transform that into a full protocol for you to follow for a 3-month period of time, and I will help you basically implement all of the self-improvement strategies and protocols needed to help you see the most growth and the most progress over these 3 months. And we will be working one-on-one to do this, right? And the goal by the end of these 3 months is you've either achieved your goal, or if you have a bigger goal, you have achieved some level of growth and progress towards that goal to the degree that you can see how to make it to your end point, basically, right? So if you're interested in that, working with me one-on-one, you can go down to the description and click the link. If you go to my Instagram, you can just DM me right there on Instagram. And if you go to the book a call link, There's a possibility it won't work right now. I've been having some issues with Calendly, but I will get those sorted most likely, so you'll be able to use either link, whichever one works best for you. If you want to just DM me instead of talking to me one-on-one on a call, that works perfectly fine. But, if you want to jump straight into a call, we can do that as well. Without further ado, let's get into this video. The first section is the power of motivation. So I'm basically going to just explain to you why motivation is actually so nice, right? Why we actually really want to have motivation and why we really want to feel motivated. Being truly driven towards a goal, right? So when we are truly driven towards a goal, this is a feeling that is, at least for men, I've found, it is comparable to whatever it is you're addicted to, right? It is comparable because the level of obsession, right? The level of discipline, the level of being able to drown out and zone out anything else, any distractions, anything that might be pulling you away from the task, right? When you are truly driven towards this goal, absolutely nothing can break your focus, right? And this is a feeling of flow. This is a feeling of momentum that builds upon itself the longer you maintain this state, right? And so when we are actually motivated, right? When we actually want to achieve a goal, it becomes so easy to do the work, right? It becomes so easy to do the difficult parts of the business or the training, whatever it is, right? It becomes so easy to do the difficult stuff that all of it in turn becomes fun, right? If the most difficult task of your business is enjoyable, is fun, well, then the rest of it is just easy, it's light. And so therefore your lifestyle becomes fun because you are engaging in something that is only going to return a level of enjoyment, right? Sometimes it will take discipline, but if you truly enjoy the main task, most of the time it will take a very little amount of discipline, and more so will just engage your attention naturally because you want to be here, right? Because you want to be creating this content, for example. I want to be making this video, and so it's easy for me to engage my attention because this is where I want to be, right? The next thing is building momentum, right? When we're motivated, right? When we want to do things, we do them, right? Build a little bit of momentum, but then naturally we want to do the next thing. We want to keep it going, right? We want to keep building upon our initial momentum that we've created. We don't want to build up some momentum and then just fall off and let it taper off after that, right? We want to build some momentum and then we want to follow through on that momentum that we've built by continuing to build more momentum, right? Ride that momentum into the next big wave instead of just riding it out until it flattens back out, right? So when we're motivated, it becomes a lot easier to build momentum because just doing one task, we aren't, okay, finally, we're done. Okay, fuck this, right? We want to engage in the next thing. And so we instantly look for the next task. And then we start to begin working on that next task. And then therefore we continue to build upon this momentum instead of, like I said, letting it spike once or twice and then allowing it to taper off and fall off. And then the last thing, a lack of motivation creates a lack of focus, right? So when you are not motivated, it is very, very difficult to focus, right? When you want to be engaging in something other than what you're doing right now, your brain can very easily just put the thing you really want to be doing in front of you, right? Tempt you with the idea of just, blowing off one more work task just to do this other thing that's more fun, that's more enjoyable. Or if you're scrolling, just like 10, 15 more minutes here before I go in and go to the gym or start work, whatever it may be. But when you're motivated, right? When the thing you want is the thing that you should be doing, your focus naturally attaches itself to that thing. And then as you start to engage in the task itself, your focus becomes deeper and more fixated onto that specific task that you're working through right now, right? So what does a dopamine balance actually feel like? Like, what is the experience of a dopamine balance? Full peace and bliss in the moment, right? So I call it full peace, where Essentially, you can sit with yourself with absolutely nothing going on around you, absolutely no stimulation, and your default state will be a state of peace, right? Your default state will be a state of minor or major enjoyment, right? Of whatever you're engaging in the moment. This means that, sorry, I'm getting distracted by somebody outside. This means that essentially in the moment, your default state, when you are just by yourself, when you are just with yourself, your default state is a state of peace, is a state of enjoyment, is a state of satisfaction, right? And this is something I experience on a regular. I have friends who are often shocked when we go on road trips, or like this snowboarding season, I went on a few trips with one of my buddies, and we went on snowboarding trips, and we would drive for like 3 hours for each of these trips, right? It would be a 3-hour drive both ways. Both times, I remember very vividly, I would hold my phone because I don't like to keep my phone in my pocket, but I almost never turned it on, right? My phone was basically off the entire drive for all of these drives, right? And there was one of these days we were driving home from one of our trips, and he mentioned to me, he's like, I'm shocked. I can't believe that you're sitting here like just doing nothing, right? You're just kind of sitting out the window. And I explained to him, I'm like, yeah, I kind of just like, I can just sit here and I'm completely satisfied with myself. I'm completely happy with myself. Like, I have absolutely nothing going on in my mind. I'm just peaceful, right? My back kind of hurts because I've been sitting for a while, and we just got done snowboarding. I took a couple falls, my lower back was a bit sore. And I was just like, yeah, my back's a bit sore, but other than that, like, I'm chilling. Like, I'm just having a great time. I'm just happy to be here. Like, I'm very chill. I'm very relaxed. I'm very peaceful, was the gist, right? And this is a state I've achieved because I don't constantly overstimulate myself. It's as simple as that. I don't constantly look for these things to do, right? I always have something to do. I'm always within a work task or between work tasks, right? If I'm not actively working and engaging in work, well, I'm resting for the next work bout, right? So I'm not always seeking out the next thing, right? And so because of that, if I'm not always seeking out the next thing, I can just be present in each moment, right? And with presence comes reality. You have to face reality. And when you like who you are, facing reality isn't a bad experience. Facing reality is quite nice. It's quite enjoyable. I got to sit there and think about, damn, like, I haven't snowboarded in a year and I really just killed it. You know what I mean? Like, I learned a bunch of new tricks and this, that, and the third, whatever. But I was basically able to sit in this state of pure bliss and pure enjoyment of, okay, like, wow, this is who I am, this is where I'm at, and this is nice, I like this. And when you are in this state, right, when you're in presence, when you're becoming aware of yourself and the environment around you, the experience you're having right now, and you don't like it, right? If that's the case and you don't enjoy the experience, well, that's room to change it. And when you create the state of dopamine balance, it becomes easier to do so, right? So because it's easier to change, it's easier to sit in presence. It's easier to sit within the moment because you're not sitting in a stagnant reality. You're not sitting in something that is, that is fact and cannot be changed, right? You're sitting in your current reality, but that reality is liquid. That reality is fluid, right? And you now have the power to change it because you have the power of action behind you. When you have a balanced level of dopamine, you have the power of action behind you. But when your dopamine is imbalanced and you cannot engage in actions, then it becomes much more difficult because it feels like a stagnant reality. The next thing is stimulation from work, right? When you're in a dopamine balance, work is going to be just as, if not more, stimulating than TikTok was before, than your drug of choice was before. It becomes more stimulating because your brain now has the attention to engage for longer periods of time, and it has the attention required to completely, essentially, engross itself into the task at hand, right? When you don't have enough dopamine, you don't have anything motivating you to do the work, and so therefore you have nothing driving action, And so therefore, the whole time it feels like forcing things to happen. It feels like forcing yourself to engage. It feels like forcing an outcome, right? But this is not a state we want to live in, right? We do not want to be sitting here forcing outcomes constantly. We cannot force outcomes, right? You have to allow yourself to engage in the work at your current level and progressively work up to the level where you can see real progress, see real results, right? If I came down here and recorded one video one time, or let's say I recorded 5 videos one time, if I'm forcing myself to do that work, right, it's very unlikely that with the difficulty of that task, that will ever happen again, right? But if I progressively build myself up to the point where I'm recording every day, and I might record multiple videos a day, right? Once I'm building myself up to that point, and then I go ahead and I record 5 videos in a day. Well, now I've built up the skill level to where tomorrow I can still come back and do it again. Tomorrow I can still come back and do it again. But when you're forcing, right? When you have to force the activity, it becomes much more difficult to repeat it. So with a dopamine balance, the work becomes more stimulating, right? The work actually becomes engaging. It actually becomes stimulating. It actually becomes enjoyable, right? And so with that, it's easier to consistently engage in the work, right? I can just come here and get into a flow state and flow until I'm done, right? And that's it. And I complete my tasks, and then I'm moving on. Like that's it. That's what it was. But if I was in a dopamine hole, this would be much more difficult, right? I would be forcing myself to engage. I would be forcing myself to present the information, right? I would be forcing myself through each video, right? So when work is more stimulating, it's easier to progress. It's easier to make it a long-term and consistent activity versus something you're just forcing yourself through to get the result, right? That's still a form of instant gratification. Now, the next thing is seeking growth. When you are in a state of dopamine balance, you naturally will seek growth. You naturally will seek opportunities to complete tasks and work, right? In order to grow and achieve more and become a better version of yourself, right? You are constantly, just as you were with your addiction, constantly in the state of seeking the next hit. You are constantly in the state of seeking the next task, the next thing to achieve and accomplish, right? And this is the natural state of human beings, but that system has been manipulated by modern technology and by our modern addictions to basically just, as I was saying, take advantage of that natural biological urge, right? Our natural need to constantly be engaging in work, right? Engaging in new tasks, right? Accomplishing and achieving more. The next thing I have is stimulation to homeostasis, right? When you're in a state of dopamine balance, how stimulation works is when you're working, for example, this is stimulating, right? This raises your stimulation levels, this raises dopamine. After the fact, it'll drop back down, right? It'll balance back out. But unlike the negative dopamine activities, right? Unlike the addictive dopamine activities, we don't spike and then drop below baseline, right? We spike and we drop back to baseline, right? We call this our return to homeostasis, right? So we return back to baseline. And this is still going to feel like somewhat of a crash, right? You're still going to feel the hit, right? That's why after you're done working, you feel like you're tired or whatever, right? You feel the hit. Then if you give yourself decompression time, which isn't time scrolling, right? That's actual decompression time. If you give yourself decompression time, you then return back to homeostasis, and now you are ready and prepared for whatever is next, right? You are now ready and prepared for the next bout of work, of whatever, right? You now become prepared for the next task, and the next task is now easier, and you can release and receive more dopamine, or at least your dopamine sensors are more sensitive to that dopamine now than it was before. So therefore, the next task will be easier and more engaging than the first one, right? And you basically live in this cycle on repeat. And so when you're only engaging in positive dopamine activities, you can actually increasingly you can achieve this state of increasing enjoyment from each task that you complete. So the last thing is making progress / building momentum. When you have a true balance of dopamine, right, movement becomes your bliss, right? Motion is your bliss. Progress is your bliss, right? Achieving tasks to generate momentum, that is where you find bliss. That is for where you find enjoyment, right? That is what you seek, just as you were seeking your drug before. So when you are balanced in your dopamine receptors, now you actually want to continuously progress. You want to continuously build more and more momentum towards whatever goals you have, right? And this building of momentum, it has to be something that you care about, right? Because your brain won't be able to derive rewards from something it cannot associate importance to, essentially, right? So once you've associated importance to something, when you see that thing move forward, right? When you see that thing progress, that creates a state of satisfaction and enjoyment and pleasure and stimulation that makes this more sustainable than most people think, right? Most people think that a true dopamine detox, right? Cutting these things out permanently and not just temporarily, a true dopamine detox, right? People think that it's unsustainable because they don't understand this principle that they think that by removing what they currently perceive as stimulating, nothing else will replace that, and they will essentially live in this void forever, right? This feeling of a dopamine deficit, right? The dopamine hole. But for those who can push all the way through and achieve what's on the other side, it is actually sustainable because we achieve the same level of stimulation and we receive that same level of stimulation from our work and from progress. And so that's how it becomes sustainable long-term, right? Is by actually finding a goal that we can progress in on a consistent basis that will replace our need for any other type of pleasure and stimulation, right? So that is all I have for you guys. Like I mentioned towards the beginning of this video, if you want to work with me one-on-one, you can go down to either of the links in the description below. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys were at least able to see what might be on the other side and gain a little bit of motivation towards trying to begin this process, right? Because it is a long process to deprogram and reprogram the brain from overstimulation, but it is absolutely worth it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.